Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into our final rendition of different kind of tweaks on the same beer from Wolf's Ridge Brewing Company out of Columbus, Ohio. This specific one is called Coffee Vanilla Dire Wolf. Yes, they all have some derivation of wolf or dire wolf in their names. This one, Imperial Stout, just as the prior. 10.4% ABV on this one, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's an Imperial Stout brewed with coffee and vanilla. So relatively straightforward premise. There's plenty of beers like this out in the marketplace. I've enjoyed all of the versions that I've had of this. The last one I had in particular was exceptional. So I have high hopes for this last version. As with the priors, they have really cool label art on their label here. Kind of hard to see. There's obviously the dire wolf, and let me rotate it around. It's kind of chasing a butterfly. Hopefully the camera's picking that up, but it looks really neat. Really cool label art on their labels here. So, as per usual, we would get this cracked, and we're going to get it poured right in our trusty stout glass. Yep, thick and dark, just as the prior, so we're going to intentionally glug it here. Give it a chance to form a head. Yes, I'm going to slosh some stout on my table. Occupational hazard, so it were. All right, so no problem forming a head on this one whatsoever. We're gonna let that do its thing. Visually, pitch black as the prior beers have been. Very, very fine, tight, super tiny champagne, and smaller like bubbles coming up out of this one. I can see it. I know the camera's not picking it up, but the cling on the glass, I can see it is tiny, which I am sure contributed to this very thick, lush, creamy head here. That will just thick and drip as thick as molasses. I can tell you, as with the prior beers, it's got a very pronounced aroma. I can already smell the coffee coming off of this one and the underlying roastiness to the malt bill. So we're going to get right up on this, give it its due course, a proper full sniff right up on it. Oh my gosh, yeah. It smells so roasty, it's incredible. So I can tell you, I already know the malt bill that they use in these beers, very, very roasty. But the coffee in this, it is binding so heavily to that deep, rich, charry, earthy, roasty side of this malt bill. It's clearly a very dark roast indeed, and they were not shy with the volume here. It's got a pronounced coffee aroma. Indeed, the vanilla on the nose on this one is quite subtle compared to the malt bill and the coffee. It really comes on very, very strongly, and it really drives out this underlying richness, this underlying roastiness. It smells absolutely fantastic. Looks the part. Head has already started to settle a little bit. I'll risk it. I'll make a mess of my beard. It is what it is, but I want to jump right in. This smells and looks amazing. Let's see what this final version is about. Oh man, oh man. Oh gosh. It gets better over time. Oh, you gotta love it. You gotta love it. Unbelievably good. Man, this is even better than I thought that it was going to be, and I had pretty high hopes just based on the prior 2 or 3 of these I've reviewed. This is incredible beer, guys. Wolf's Ridge in Columbus, Ohio, bravo. I absolutely get what you're doing, and I believe in it, and I support your cause. This is what makes the world of craft beer absolutely worth it, guys. Unbelievably good beer. So, before we even get into this incredible flavor profile, let's talk texture and weight. This is a 10.4% Imperial Stout. You would expect it to be weighty, but it's even more weighty than you would anticipate. This is clearly starting kind of in that medium heavy territory, bordering on heavy. It has a lot of weight behind it, a lot of presence to this beer. It feels like it's substantial when you drink it and you swallow it. On the palate, an absolute ton of resistance, as I came to expect from the prior versions of this same kind of beer. And yeah, just as with the prior as well, this one gets quite creamy, quite silky, very fine, almost velvet-like when you agitate on the palate. And that resistance behind it just pairs so beautifully with this nice, big, weighty body. Now, this head has settled down a bit now. Obviously, the natural oils in my beard, they're going to do their thing, but it's still holding quite nicely. A really nice, creamy pad floating there. It really did a great job. All of these beers really did a great job of head and retention. We're going to top that off right before the curve on this tulip on our stout glass, just to get a bit more in there. So, flavor profile. It is big, it is bold, it is in your face, it is intense, it is deep, it is roasty, it is earthy, it is bitter. It has every hallmark that I expected based on the prior 2 or 3 versions of this beer that I had. It's very bold. This is a beer that, just with the prior, is made for people that love big, bold, intensely flavored beers. This is not for the faint of heart. This is made for a true big, bold beer or stout connoisseur, and it is absolutely top notch. The roasty edge from that malt and that coffee hit you in tandem as soon as you swallow. It is just boom, roast, 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 roast. And as it opens up over time, it gets even more intense, more roasty. There's earthy elements to it. There's char elements to it. It doesn't ever go down the road of even hinting at smokiness, but there's char, there's roast, there's earthiness. So it's very deep, it's very intense. And the bitter profile on this is quite nice. I'm not saying it's like West Coast style IPA bitters, but it's all predominantly coming from the malt bill and the coffee itself. The natural inherent bitters from deeply roasted malt and very deeply roasted coffee beans. And that, for my money, I think makes it all the better and all the more clever. Because, of course, it's a beer, it's got hops in it. What they used, not some new fancy, that's been popular in the last 10 plus years, hop variety. This is clearly back to basics, classic hopping with these naturally earthy profiles. Maybe not even that high of alpha acid, but that's what they used. And it's not so much that there's even any hoppy aroma to it, not at all. It's very malty and very coffee bean laden. The same thing is true of the flavor profile in this beer. It is all related to the coffee and the malt, where all of that roast and that underlying bitterness is coming from. Now, the vanilla was very subtle on the nose. I gotta say, it also appears to be, at least on first sip, quite subtle in the flavor profile. So this is complex, it's big and bold. There's a lot to pick apart in here as your brain is processing the inputs. I'm gonna have to jump back in for a second sip. I'm gonna let everything re-intensify. I'm gonna pick it apart, see if I can hone in on where exactly that vanilla is coming into play here, and then we're gonna talk about this finish, but just another tremendous beer. This is a stout lover's beer, and I love stout, so bully to me. Take 2. Oh man, this beer has so much presence. So on second sip, I'm a lot more clearly on the front side able to pick out that vanilla. And we talk about this a fair bit. High ABV beers tend to often have, when you first swallow, the suggestion of sweetness without the beer actually being sweet. This is not a sweet beer by any stretch of the imagination. No lactose in sight. But that inherent quality you get from the high ABV, that's where it really does draw out those first subtle bits of the vanilla. So it does come in on the front side a good bit before you're hit with that immediacy of the wall of roast from the malt bill and the coffee. And it's very earthy, it's very charry, nice kick of bitters. It really does have a nice kick of bitters, and it is all driven from this malt bill and the coffee. I can tell you that, and it's absolutely tremendous. And it just keeps moving in and out and moving into different phases of roast and roast qualities and earthiness as it progresses over time. Now, in terms of the finish, this is definitely longer than average. It's not a barrel-aged beer, but the intensity of the qualities of the beer are what are driving it out. So it is definitely well above average, and really the driving factor on this one, just as with the priors, is coming down to the intensity and depth of the roast in the malt bill, and in this one, and maybe one or two of the others, that coffee. So there's a very big driving factor of that roastiness. Roasty notes do tend to linger on the back of the palate, as do their inherent bitter qualities. They do tend to stick, and the natural thickness of this really does coat it around the palate, so you do get a lot of mileage out of each sip. It's probably been pushing a minute since I had that last sip again, and there is definite lingering, roasty, earthy, charry underpinnings of the malt bill and the lingering coffee, and it's absolutely delicious. So the vanilla really does come into play in this beer as a flavor profile on the front end. It's not one that lingers on the back end, and it's really gone within the first few seconds. But as you have that sensation of sweetness before the intensity of bitters overtake your palate, that's where it comes into play, and it's very, very nice. I don't know if they used extract, if they aged it on vanilla, if they added the inside of the vanilla beans, scraped out some seeds. I'm not sure their process, but what they did tastes really nice, and it tastes like true vanilla. And pairing with this big earthiness, it's a nice cut through that kind of preps your palate before you get dragged down into the weight and the intensity of this earthy, charry, roasty nature that this beer has. But I absolutely love it. I love all kinds of stouts, but these are my favorite. These big, intense, rich, earthy, roasty, char-like that inherently have natural bitters to them. It just makes the beer feel so much bigger than it otherwise could, and this is just another one that they have pulled off tremendously. This is a top-tier stout, and I am going to take my time sipping on every last drop of this one. And when we come back, we will get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Wolf's Ridge Brewing Company's Coffee Vanilla Dire Wolf, an Imperial Stout clocking in at 10.4% ABV. This one was, of course, brewed with coffee and vanilla. Wolf's Ridge Brewing is based in Columbus, Ohio. So starting with the aroma on this one, very bold, very, very pungent. The depth of the roast was really evident on the nose, and you could really pick up that roasty edge of the malt bill as well as the coffee. Admittedly, the vanilla was a lot more subtle, but it still smelled amazing and absolutely well above average pungency. The aroma does get a 10 out of 10. For the taste, in general, I loved the taste. I personally thought it was spectacular, but the only thing that I was noticing was, just as with the aroma profile, the vanilla was quite subtle on the flavor profile. It was just overwhelmed largely by that big roasty malt bill and the roasty edge of the coffee beans. Now, I personally really enjoyed that, but for balance sake in the flavor profile, it needed a little more vanilla to let that come through and speak. I only docked 1 point here though. The taste gets a 9 out of 10. For the body, this was a very heavy body and a big high ABV beer. Body does get a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, very resistant mouthfeel. This one got very creamy, very silky when you agitated it around the palate, and it did match that body in terms of texture as well. The mouthfeel gets a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this was well above average. This was not a barrel-aged beer, but it was high ABV and it was big, bold pungency of flavor. And that was the driving factor to extend the finish out on this. It was residual, roasty, earthy, underlying from the malt bill and the coffee that did drive it out well above average. The finish gets an 8 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did an absolutely fantastic job. Nice, thick, creamy head, stuck around the whole time. Head and retention gets a 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook, pitch black as expected. Appearance gets a 10 out of 10. For the balance, in general, I personally loved the balance on the beer, but I talked about this on the flavor profile. It needed a little more vanilla to really evenly balance out the additives into this beer. It was just overwhelmed by the depth of roast and intensity of roast, and the vanilla was just pretty subtle by comparison. But again, I only docked 1 point here. Balance gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling and intangibles, subjectively, I loved it. This was the third or fourth one of these Dire Wolf, beers by Wolf's Ridge, and I get what they're doing, and I definitely like what they're doing. Subjectively, feeling and intangible, 10 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. This beer only lost a couple points in a couple categories. Nothing that really detracted from what this beer was about. A big, bold, in-your-face Imperial Stout, and I think they did a great job here. Example of the style gets a 10 out of 10, which does bring the total score on Wolf's Ridge Brewing Company's Coffee Vanilla Direwolf to a 96 out of 100. Well above average. I enjoyed all of these versions of this kind of big Imperial Stout with different kind of flavors and additives. They were all equally delicious. Some I preferred personally better than others, but they were all really, really great. If you're a fan of big, bold, flavor-forward Imperial Stouts, any of these I would recommend, and this is no exception. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.